The other big news today, the Prime Minister's decision to commit Australia to another military deployment to the Middle East. Another deployment as part of, well, a coalition of the willing, essentially, because right now it only involves the US, the UK and Australia. Now, this deployment is not on the scale, though, of that original coalition of the willing deployment to Iraq. This isn't about toppling a regime. This isn't about regaining territory from terrorists, as we saw more recently in Iraq and Syria. This mission is to patrol the Strait of Hormuz, where Iranian forces have been intimidating and even seizing commercial ships in recent months. Now, this is a narrow passage of water, but it's important to the world. And it's important to Australia as well, because a lot of crude oil and refined oil comes through there. About 15% of Australia's crude oil, more than a quarter of our refined oil, comes through that strait from the Middle East. The Prime Minister said without freedom of navigation there, the Australian economy is potentially threatened. That's the justification he's certainly expressing for Australia getting involved in what he's calling an international maritime security cooperation force. Now, international is the key word Scott Morrison is keen to stress here. He doesn't want this being seen as Australia being sucked into another US-led military adventure in the Middle East, and this time at the behest of Donald Trump. Time and again today, he stressed this is a multinational mission.
It is in Australia's national interests to work with our international partners to contribute to an international maritime security mission known as the International Maritime Security Construct, the IMSC, in the Middle East.
International it may be, but right now, as mentioned, only the US, the UK and Australia have agreed to take part. Others are expected to join up, and Australia's announcement today may encourage them to do so. But as of now, there's no commitment from countries like Canada, France, Germany, South Korea, India, or plenty of others that also rely on safe passage of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. And while it is international, this will be led, this force, by the United States, a point that was confirmed by the Chief of Defence.
It'll be a US-led operation, and we will be a participant in that with a multinational force.
So what are we sending? Let's have a look. It is a very limited deployment here. The first to go will be an undisclosed number, but a small number of support staff who will go to an international headquarters in the Middle East. Presumably that will be at one of the air bases where we've had personnel really since the beginning of the Afghanistan war. This will be followed in the coming months before the end of the year by a P-8 surveillance plane. Now, that has 10 crew members. And they'll be there by the end of the year. Their job, obviously, will be to patrol the skies, to look for any evidence, any movement of Iranian vessels or forces that could be threatening or harassing commercial shipping. And then the big one from January next year, from the new year, a Navy frigate will go. That has 177 personnel on board usually. They'll be deployed from January, and they'll be there to deter any threats. Now, it's important to note, we've had a frigate on rotation in the Gulf for a long time now. Most recently, they've been there targeting pirate activity, illegal drug and arms smuggling operations. This will be a new mission and potentially a more dangerous mission, but it's not a major additional strain on our defence forces, given we've had a frigate there most often for a long time. What's not entirely clear, though, right now are the rules of engagement. What will the sailors on board this frigate be actually required to do if Iran does try to stop an oil tanker or seize an oil tanker? Will they engage the Iranians? Well, here was the Chief of Defence on that.
Our people are very well trained, and they'll be operating under international law, and their presence will be to support the security of shipping and freedom of navigation under international law.
Will they have the law to open fire? What will the law allow them to do?
Operate within international law.
The Defence Minister went on to explain this is something that's still to be worked out in discussions with those international partners. But I spoke earlier to Peter Jennings, head of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. He strongly supports what the government's done here. What will the rules of engagement look like? Well, he says it could mean some of the Navy personnel on board the frigate, maybe 50 at a time, going on board each commercial ship that goes through the strait to make sure they're safe. They would be armed, he says, with a heavy machine gun.
The way I could see this playing out is that you would possibly put teams onto the vessels which are transiting the straits, with 50 cal machine guns and the capacity to act as a bit of a soft defence force on the boats.
So they're not just going to be on the frigate. You reckon they'll be ultimately on the tankers themselves?
It's one possibility for how you could do it, and you'd helicopter a team onto the boat, it transits
help them
straight,
get through.
Then you bring the team, put them onto the next vessel.
But again, if an Iranian Revolutionary Guard speedboat comes hurling towards the tanker and 50 of our sailors are on board that tanker with a machine gun, what are they going to do?
You shoot at the attacking vessel and provide it probably with a warning shot first, and then go after it for certain if it actually looks like it's about to engage in a hostile act.
Labor has also strongly supported the government's decision here. It was briefed before the announcement. Here was the acting Labor leader and Shadow Defence Minister, Richard Marles.
Freedom of navigation for Australia as a trading island nation is completely central to our national interest. The vast bulk of our trade goes by sea, and trade forms a very large part of our national economy. And so freedom of navigation, as it's expressed in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, is a piece of international architecture which is as central to Australia's national interest as any.
But not everyone thinks this is a good idea. Some argue we should be focusing our military resources in our own backyard.